The room is dimly lit, a hush falling over the visitors as they step into the narrow gallery. Dust lingers in the air, caught in the thin shafts of light. At the center, encased in glass, rests a skull on a velvet cushion. The sockets are hollow, the jaw uneven, the surface fractured with age. For years, this relic was treated almost like scripture. School groups were brought here to stand before it. Guides spoke with the assurance of priests. "This is your ancestor," they said, their fingers pointing to the ancient face that stared back without expression. The skull was known as the Piltdown Man, and in the early 20th century it was celebrated as the missing link between ape and human. Newspapers declared it a scientific triumph. Museums placed it at the root of human genealogy. Even textbooks absorbed its authority. But in 1953, the truth emerged. Piltdown Man was not an ancestor at all. It was a forgery, a human skull fused with the jaw of an orangutan, its teeth filed down to fit the illusion. For 40 years, it had deceived the public and distorted the path of inquiry. This story is more than a cautionary tale about fraud. It forces us to ask how stable the story of human evolution really is. If one skull could command such reverence only to collapse into scandal, then how certain is the grand narrative that humankind evolved from apes? Mainstream science, of course, offers its structure. Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species in 1859 laid out the principle of natural selection. The idea that species change over time with traits favorable for survival, passed down through generations. 12 years later, in The Descent of Man, Darwin extended this principle to us. He suggested that humans and modern apes share a common ancestor. He did not claim that humans descended directly from chimpanzees or gorillas, but rather that all are branches sprouting from a deeper root. Evidence since then has reinforced this framework. Fossils scattered across Africa, Asia, and Europe reveal beings that are neither fully ape nor fully human. Australopithecus afarensis, the species of the famous Lucy discovered in Ethiopia in 1974, walked upright but still bore long arms and a small brain. Homo habilis, appearing around 2 million years ago, left behind primitive stone tools. Homo erectus, emerging soon after, mastered fire and expanded beyond Africa. Neanderthals, who thrived in Europe and Western Asia, lived alongside early Homo sapiens, even interbreeding with them. Genetic studies today confirm their traces in our DNA. The genetic record adds weight. In 2001, the Human Genome Project revealed just how close our kinship runs. Humans and chimpanzees share about 98 to 99% of their genetic code. To put it differently, the difference between us and chimpanzees is smaller than the difference between some species of birds that appear almost identical to the casual eye. The numbers suggest an intimacy that cannot be ignored, and yet certainty is not so simple. The fossil record is incomplete, like a book whose pages have been torn out. Whole stretches of time yield no bones, no teeth, no tools. Scientists speak of missing links, transitional species that must have existed but remain hidden or lost. New discoveries sometimes close the gaps, but often they open new puzzles. Ardipithecus ramidus, discovered in 1994 and dated to 4.4 million years ago, was unlike the chimp-like ancestor some expected. It walked upright but also had a grasping big toe suited for climbing trees. Instead of a neat ladder, the picture looks more like a dense thicket of branches, some ending abruptly, others splitting into new directions. The public imagination, however, has often been guided by simpler images. Textbooks still print the familiar drawing of a line of figures moving left to right, a stooped ape, a half-upright creature, then finally a modern human striding tall. The image is powerful. It tells a story of progress, of inevitability. But it is misleading. Evolution does not move in straight lines. It sprawls, forks, and stumbles. Some branches die out entirely. Others linger in forms unexpected. To picture it as a march toward us is to misunderstand both evolution and ourselves. This misunderstanding is not accidental. Human beings crave narratives of ascent stories in which we are the pinnacle. To see ourselves as one species among many, as cousins to gorillas and chimps, threatens our sense of uniqueness. That tension between science and identity is one reason debates about human origins have always been fraught both culturally and politically. Darwin's theory was not only a scientific bombshell, it was a social one. In Victorian England, to suggest that humans shared ancestry with apes was considered scandalous, even blasphemous. But even if mainstream science offers a sturdy framework, questions remain. Why did Homo sapiens alone among hominins achieve the capacity for art ritual and symbolic thought? Why did Neanderthals with brains as large as ours disappear? While we endured around 50,000 years ago, evidence suggests a sudden surge cave paintings, at Lascaux ornaments carved from bone, careful burials for the dead. The leap seems abrupt as if a switch had been thrown. Some scholars describe it as the cognitive revolution, a threshold moment when human imagination expanded beyond survival into myth, religion, and art. Theories abound. Perhaps a chance mutation altered the structure of our brains. Perhaps cultural innovations accumulated until a tipping point was reached. Perhaps environmental pressures demanded new strategies for communication and planning. But whatever the cause, the change stands out as dramatic. Evolution, usually measured in millions of years, appears here in the span of mere millennia. This is where curiosity turns into unease. If the fossil record is incomplete, and if our intellectual leap seems so sudden, then might our story hold dimensions not yet explained? Some suggest that our uniqueness is only apparent, that other hominins also had culture and art, but their traces were lost. Others argue that symbolic thought may have emerged gradually, only seeming sudden, because evidence is rare. Still others, moving outside mainstream science, wonder if something beyond natural selection was at work. Ideas of intelligent design or even extraterrestrial intervention arise at the edges of speculation. They remain unverified, but their very persistence speaks to the hunger for explanations that fit the mystery of our difference. Returning to the skull and the glass case, the lesson is clear. For decades, Piltdown Man was revered as truth, only to collapse into shame. The fraud itself matters less than the readiness with which it was believed. It shows how fragile our confidence can be, how easily we mistake fragments for the whole. Human origins are written not in clear chapters, but in scattered shards, each discovery provisional, each theory subject to revision. Are we then simply apes with larger brains, the products of blind selection and chance? Or are we something stranger carrying within us a leap not yet accounted for? The evidence points in many directions, but none with finality. The story is still unfolding, still incomplete. And so in that hushed gallery, the skull stares back, not with answers, but with questions. What do we truly know of our beginnings? What remains buried, waiting to shift the story again? The glass case becomes a mirror, and in it we see not only a relic of the past, but the uncertainty of our own reflection. The year is 1859. The chill of late November settles over London as a small book appears on the shelves of a publisher named John Murray. Its cover is plain, its title unassuming, On the Origin of Species. No dramatic illustration, no gilded letters, only the quiet confidence of a man named Charles Darwin. Few could have guessed that these pages would ignite a storm, not only in the halls of science, but in the very soul of Western civilization. Darwin had spent more than 2 decades gathering his evidence. He had sailed on the HMS Beagle in the 1830s, wandering the coasts of South America, collecting fossils and studying finches on the Galapagos Islands. He returned to England with notebooks filled with observations that whispered a dangerous possibility: species were not fixed. They changed, adapted, branched. But to say this aloud in Victorian Britain was to flirt with heresy. When On the Origin of Species finally appeared, its reception was electric. Some scientists hailed it as revolutionary. Others recoiled in horror. Newspapers printed cartoons of Darwin with the body of an ape, mocking him as half man, half monkey. Preachers thundered from pulpits that Darwin's theory reduced humanity to beasts, stripping away divine dignity. At the heart of the controversy was not merely biology, but identity. If humans were not created separately, if we were instead products of natural processes shared with animals, then the hierarchy of creation was upended. No longer the pinnacle of divine design, humans became one branch among many. The theological implications were staggering, yet Darwin's prose was cautious. He never claimed that humans descended directly from chimpanzees or gorillas. He spoke instead of common ancestry, of gradual divergence over vast spans of time. Natural selection, he argued, was the mechanism. Variations arise. Those better suited to survival persist. Those less suited fade. Over countless generations, the small differences accumulate until new species emerge. The evidence Darwin presented was compelling, but incomplete. He drew on the breeding of pigeons, showing how human selection could transform a species within decades. He described the fossil record, though acknowledging its gaps. He pointed to geographical distribution, where islands housed unique species adapted to local conditions. Each piece was suggestive rather than conclusive. But woven together, they formed a pattern difficult to ignore. Still, the implications for humanity were so profound that Darwin himself hesitated. It was not until 1871 in The Descent of Man that he fully addressed human origins. There he proposed that humans and apes share a common ancestor, a suggestion that sparked even greater outrage. Victorian society clung fiercely to distinctions between man and animal, distinctions that underpin not only theology, but also social order. To blur those boundaries was to threaten the fabric of meaning itself. The debates were fierce. In 1860, at a meeting of the British Association for the Advancement of Science in Oxford, Bishop Samuel Wilberforce famously confronted biologist Thomas Henry Huxley, known as Darwin's bulldog. The bishop mocked the idea of descent from apes, asking whether Huxley claimed an ape for his grandfather or grandmother. Huxley, calm but sharp, replied that he would rather have an ape for an ancestor than a man who misused his gifts of eloquence to obscure the truth. The exchange became legend, emblematic of the clash between science and religion. But the clash was not so simple. Many religious figures found ways to reconcile Darwin's ideas with faith. Some argued that evolution could be the method through which God created. Others saw in natural selection a brutal, godless mechanism that contradicted the notion of a benevolent deity. The cultural battlefield stretched far beyond the laboratories. Evolution became entangled with politics, philosophy, and morality. Outside the controversy, evidence continued to accumulate. Fossils hinted at forms both human-like and ape-like. The Neanderthal skull discovered in Germany in 1856, just before Darwin's book, raised questions about other branches of humanity. Were Neanderthals brutish cave dwellers, or were they kin with minds of their own? The answer remained uncertain. Each discovery seemed to both clarify and complicate the picture. In America, the debate had its own flavor. The Scopes trial of 1925, though decades after Darwin revealed how evolution remained volatile. A Tennessee teacher, John Scopes, was put on trial for teaching evolution in violation of state law. The trial drew national attention, pitting modernist science against traditionalist religion. It showed how Darwin's ideas, long after their publication, still carried the power to divide communities. And yet, while Darwin's theory was revolutionary, it was not the final word. Genetics, unknown in his time, would later provide the missing mechanism. The rediscovery of Gregor Mendel's work on inheritance in the early 1900s and the eventual mapping of DNA in the late 20th century confirmed and extended Darwin's insights. Natural selection was joined by mutation, genetic drift, and gene flow as forces shaping evolution. The picture grew richer, more intricate. But even as the science advanced, the cultural shockwaves remained. To say that humans share ancestry with apes is still for many unsettling. It undermines the comforting narrative of human exceptionalism. It raises questions about morality, consciousness, and destiny. If we are animals, are our values merely evolutionary strategies? If we are kin to chimpanzees, what separates us truly? Here lies the tension that persists today. On one side, mountains of evidence, fossils, DNA, comparative anatomy. On the other, the deep-seated human need for meaning, for distinction, for the sense that we are more than biology. Darwin provided a mechanism, but he also opened a wound. And in that wound, debates flourish. Some scholars emphasize continuity, pointing to the intelligence of apes, their use of tools, their complex social structures. Others emphasize discontinuity, highlighting the unique human capacity for symbolic language, art, and abstract thought. The spectrum of views reflects not only scientific uncertainty, but also cultural values. The 19th century was a crucible where science, faith, and philosophy collided. Darwin did not set out to provoke a cultural revolution, but his ideas ensured one. The ripples spread from lecture halls to churches, from laboratories to parliaments. Evolution was not just about biology, it was about what it means to be human. So when we look back at 1859, at the modest book that shook the world, we see more than a scientific theory. We see a moment when the ground shifted beneath our feet. The skull in the glass case reminds us of fraud, but Darwin's book reminds us of fragility, how quickly the foundations of certainty can be unsettled. Are we prepared even now to face the full implications of evolution? Or do we still cling to stories that preserve our specialness, even when the evidence points elsewhere. The question that rattled Victorian England continues to echo. Darwin opened the door. What waits on the other side is still being revealed. The desert wind sweeps across the Ethiopian plain, carrying dust that has not shifted for millions of years. Beneath the cracked earth lies a fragment of bone, unremarkable to the eye but extraordinary in its implication. When paleoanthropologists lifted it from the soil in 1974, they realized they were holding a piece of a skeleton belonging to a being who had walked the earth over 3 million years ago. She would be named Lucy after the Beatles song Lucy in the Sky, with diamonds that played at the camp the night she was found. For decades, she has been celebrated as one of humanity's earliest known ancestors. Lucy belonged to Australopithecus afarensis, a species that lived in East Africa about 3.2 million years ago. Her skeleton was only about 40% complete, yet that was enough to show something crucial. She walked upright. Her pelvis and leg bones bore the marks of bipedalism, even though her skull still resembled that of an ape. Here was a creature caught in between, neither fully human nor merely ape. For scientists, Lucy became a symbol of the transition. For the public, she was a revelation. But Lucy was not the first fossil to stir the imagination. In the mid-19th century, just a few years before Darwin published On the Origin of Species, quarry workers in Germany uncovered strange bones in a limestone valley called Neanderthal. The skull was heavy-browed, the body stocky. At first, scientists argued over whether it belonged to a deformed human or a separate species. Eventually, it was recognized as evidence of a cousin Homo neanderthalensis. The Neanderthal discovery was unsettling. It suggested that humans were not alone in their lineage, that there had been other kinds of humans, different yet similar, who once walked beside us. If they existed, what happened to them? Did we replace them? Did we coexist? Did we share bloodlines? These questions remain alive even today as genetic testing reveals traces of Neanderthal DNA in modern humans. By the early 20th century, more fossils surfaced. In Tanzania and Kenya, archaeologists uncovered skulls and tools attributed to Homo habilis, the handyman so named because of the stone tools found nearby. Dates placed him between 2.4 and 1.4 million years ago. His brain was larger than Lucy's, though still smaller than ours. The tools were crude flakes of stone chipped to sharp edges, but they marked a turning point. Intelligence was no longer speculation. It left its imprint in objects that survived the ages. Then came Homo erectus, the upright man. Emerging about 1.9 million years ago, he is believed to have spread across Africa and into Asia. Fossils from Java and China suggest a wide range far beyond the cradle of East Africa. Homo erectus mastered fire, a force that not only provided warmth and protection, but also transformed diet, health, and society. Charred bones and hearths scattered through archaeological sites speak of gatherings around flames, a pattern familiar even today. Each discovery layered new detail onto the human story. Yet each also exposed new gaps. Fossils are rare and often fragmented. A jaw here, a skull there, a scattering of teeth. Scientists piece them together like detectives reconstructing a crime scene from shards of evidence. The result was not a neat ladder, but a complex puzzle. And in that puzzle, debates flourished. Were all these fossils truly separate species or variations of one lineage? Did Lucy's kind give rise to Homo habilis, or were they parallel branches? Did Homo erectus evolve directly into modern humans, or was there an intermediate? The answers shift with each new find. The record is complicated further by frauds and mistakes. In 1922, a single tooth found in Nebraska was proclaimed a missing link, dubbed Nebraska Man. It turned out to belong to an extinct pig. Such errors, though corrected, remind us of how fragile conclusions can be when evidence is thin. Yet despite the disputes, a pattern emerges. Across millions of years, beings appear that are more human-like than their predecessors. Their brains enlarge, their tools improve their social behaviors, leave traces. The overall trajectory suggests continuity, but the steps are uneven. Some branches, like the Neanderthals, thrive for hundreds of thousands of years only to vanish. Others, like Lucy's kin, leave only bones in the dust. Mainstream science interprets these fossils as milestones in evolution, but some scholars caution against reading too much into fragments. A skeleton like Lucy's may seem to stand between ape and human, But with only 40% of her bones, how complete is the picture? Fossils are shaped not only by biology, but also by interpretation. Each discovery is filtered through the lens of expectation, the hunger to find the missing link. And so the narrative of early fossils is both inspiring and uncertain. It inspires because it shows us in tangible form the deep antiquity of our species. It unsettles because it reveals how provisional our knowledge is. Each new discovery has the power to rewrite the family tree, to shift our place within it. Consider how in 2003, scientists on the Indonesian island of Flores uncovered remains of a tiny hominin, only about a meter tall with a small brain. Nicknamed the Hobbit, it was dated to as recently as 50,000 years ago. Its existence challenged assumptions that only Homo sapiens and Neanderthals shared the planet. Suddenly, the story grew more crowded, more complex. These surprises show how incomplete the fossil record remains. What other beings might lie buried, waiting to overturn our understanding again? If Lucy Neanderthals and hobbits could emerge from the ground, might there be others unknown that will redraw the map once more? The fossils speak but in whispers. They tell us that we are ancient, that our line is tangled, that we are not alone in ancestry. But they also leave silences long stretches where no bones have yet been found, where imagination fills the void. In those silences, debates flourish. Are we truly the inevitable product of evolution from apes? Or are we glimpsing only fragments, the rest concealed, leaving open the possibility of stories not yet told? So when we look at Lucy's bones, or the heavy brow of Neanderthals, or the tiny skull of the Hobbit, we are not only looking at them, we are looking at ourselves at the fragile mirror of origins. The glass case that holds them reflects both knowledge and ignorance. It reflects the triumph of discovery and the humility of uncertainty. The first fossils gave us a glimpse of our past, but they also gave us something more unsettling, the realization that our past is stranger, more complicated, and perhaps more incomplete than we imagined. The bones in the earth are silent. It is we who give them voice, and in doing so, we reveal both our curiosity and our doubt. A trail of footprints presses into ancient volcanic ash, the shapes frozen by chance and time. The year is roughly 3.6 million years ago. A small group of hominins walks across the plain that would later be called Letoli in what is now Tanzania. Their feet leave clear impressions, arches toes, a stride that is undeniably upright. The wind scatters the ash, the prints harden, and for millennia they remain hidden beneath layers of soil until in 1978 they are uncovered by paleoanthropologist Mary Leakey and her team. To gaze upon them today is to look directly at a moment when beings very much like us crossed a landscape long vanished. These footprints are among the earliest direct evidence of bipedalism. They tell us not only that hominins walked upright, but that they walked together, perhaps a family, perhaps hunters, perhaps just wanderers seeking food. Whatever the purpose, the act of walking upright would become the signature of our lineage, and walking led to wandering. Mainstream science frames the great narrative as the out-of-Africa model. It suggests that Homo erectus, emerging around 1.9 million years ago, was the first hominin to leave Africa. Fossils found in Georgia, Indonesia, and China suggest that by 1.8 million years ago, our ancestors had spread far beyond their birthplace. Stone tools scattered across Eurasia confirm their presence. They endured in these regions for hundreds of thousands of years, adapting to new climates and new challenges. The evidence grows clearer with Homo sapiens. Genetic studies point strongly to an African origin for modern humans about 200,000 to 300,000 years ago. Fossils at Jebel Irhoud in Morocco, dated to roughly 315,000 years ago, show faces recognizably human. From Africa, small groups of Homo sapiens began to migrate outward, first to the Middle East around 100,000 years ago, then into Asia, Europe, and eventually Australia. By about 50,000 years ago, humans had reached Southeast Asia, and by 40,000 years ago, Europe. The Americas came later with migration across the Bering Land Bridge, perhaps 15,000 to 20,000 years ago. The pattern is striking. We are at our core a wandering species. Migration is not a footnote, it is the heartbeat of our story. The spread of humans across continents transformed not only our species, but the planet itself. And yet this migration is not without puzzles. For example, fossils of Homo erectus in Indonesia known as Java Man, date to around 1 million years ago, suggesting a remarkably early dispersal. In China, remains labeled Peking Man show a similar antiquity. How these populations relate to modern humans remains debated. Did Homo erectus vanish, leaving no descendants? Or did some of their genes linger absorbed into later arrivals? The genetic evidence complicates matters. DNA analysis reveals that modern non-African humans carry small percentages of Neanderthal DNA. In parts of Asia and Oceania, traces of another group, the Denisovans, are also present. This means that as modern humans migrated out of Africa, they did not simply replace other hominins. They encountered them. They lived alongside them. They even interbred. The story is less one of conquest than of entanglement, with lineages crossing like rivers. Some scholars argue for a multi-regional model, suggesting that modern humans evolved simultaneously in different parts of the world, with gene flow maintaining unity. Most evidence today supports the out-of-Africa model, but the presence of Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA means the picture is not purely one of replacement. It is a tapestry of contact and exchange. Artifacts add another layer. Caves in France and Spain hold paintings tens of thousands of years old, horses, bison handprints blown in ochre dust. Shell beads in Africa dated to 75,000 years ago suggest symbolic thinking before the Great Migrations. In Australia, rock art and tools suggest human presence at least 50,000 years ago, astonishing given the ocean crossings required. Each site is a footprint of the mind, as telling as bones or DNA. Yet questions remain. How many waves of migration were there? Did early humans leave Africa in pulses, some failing, others succeeding? Some evidence hints at earlier dispersals, perhaps as far back as 120,000 years ago, that did not last. Fossils in Israel dated to 90,000 years ago show early modern humans outside Africa long before the main migration that populated the globe. Were they evolutionary dead ends or part of a wider story still being uncovered? The uncertainties invite speculation. Some wonder if the spread of humans was driven purely by necessity, climate shifts, dwindling food sources, competition, or if there was something in human nature itself that compelled us outward. The urge to cross the next hill to seek new horizons may have been as vital as hunger or survival. Perhaps migration is not just an accident of environment, but a fundamental trait of who we are. But migration carried consequences. As humans spread, they transformed ecosystems, hunted species to extinction, and reshaped landscapes. The arrival of humans in Australia coincides with the disappearance of giant marsupials. In the Americas, mammoths and saber-toothed cats vanished not long after humans arrived. Was this coincidence or causation? Scholars debate, but the timing is haunting. And what of the hominins we met along the way? Neanderthals disappeared about 40,000 years ago, shortly after modern humans spread into Europe. Did we outcompete them? Did climate change finish them? Or did interbreeding mean they never fully disappeared, living on in fragments of our DNA? The Denisovans, known only from a few bones and teeth in Siberia, remain even more mysterious. Their genetic traces live in people of Melanesia and Tibet, but their story is scarcely told. The migrations out of Africa are both triumph and enigma. They show us as adaptable, resilient, inventive, but they also reveal how much we do not know. Fossils are few artifacts, fragile, DNA degraded. Each discovery reshapes the map. The outline is clear: we began in Africa, and from there spread across the globe. But the details blur, so we return to the footprints at Latoli, pressed into ash by beings long gone. They remind us that every step we take is part of an ancient journey. They remind us that we are walkers, wanderers, migrants by nature. But they also remind us of silence. For all the prints we have found, there are countless more erased by wind and rain, lost forever. Are we confident that we know the full story of our departure from Africa? Or are we seeing only fragments with the rest still buried, waiting to surprise us again? The footprints are both evidence and question, guiding us forward into mysteries still unfolding. In a sealed freezer, bathed in sterile light, lies a fragment of bone no bigger than a child's thumb. It was pulled from the depths of a Siberian cave called Denisova, a cave where humans once huddled against the cold. To the naked eye, the fragment seems insignificant, a splinter of ivory-colored mineral hardly worth saving. But when scientists placed it under the lens of modern genetics, the results startled the world. From that fragment emerged an entire genome, an ancient cousin of humanity never before known. They called them Denisovans, and their DNA now lives inside millions of people scattered across Asia and Oceania. It was a reminder that bones tell one story, but DNA tells another. The fossil record is fractured, sparse, often misleading. Genes, by contrast, are archives carried inside our cells. They preserve echoes of encounters, traces of ancestry, whispers of migrations. If fossils are voices from the earth, DNA is a voice from within ourselves. The study of DNA transformed the question of human origins. In the late 20th century, scientists began comparing the genetic sequences of humans with those of other primates. The results were astonishing. Humans and chimpanzees share about 98 to 99% of their DNA. Gorillas are close behind and orangutans not far. This degree of similarity suggests a shared ancestor within the last 6 to 7 million years. It also reshaped the way we think about ourselves. The boundaries between human and animal, so carefully guarded in culture and theology, blurred in the language of nucleotides. The Human Genome Project, completed in 2001, gave the most comprehensive map of our DNA. Billions of base pairs were sequenced, revealing the structure of our code. It confirmed what earlier studies had hinted, that humans are not biologically separate from the rest of life, but deeply enmeshed within it. We share genes not only with primates, but with mice, with fish, even with yeast. The very machinery of life is a shared inheritance. But DNA does more than affirm kinship. It records history. By studying mutations that accumulate over generations, scientists can estimate when lineages diverge. This molecular clock suggested that all modern humans trace back to a population in Africa roughly 200,000 years ago. From there, small groups carried their DNA outward, branching across continents. This finding supported the out-of-Africa model, but with greater precision than fossils alone could provide. Perhaps the most famous example is mitochondrial Eve. Mitochondria, the tiny powerhouses of cells, contain their own DNA passed down only through the mother. By comparing mitochondrial DNA across populations, researchers traced all humans back to a single woman who lived in Africa about 150,000 to 200,000 years ago. She was not the only woman alive at the time, nor the first human, but she represents the common ancestor of all living humans through maternal lines. Likewise, studies of the Y chromosome suggest a Y chromosomal atom who lived tens of thousands of years later, representing the common ancestor of paternal lines. These figures are symbolic rather than literal, but they show how DNA binds us together. The revelations did not stop there. As sequencing improved, scientists examined ancient DNA extracted from Neanderthal bones. To the surprise of many, they found that modern humans outside Africa carry about 1 to 4% Neanderthal DNA. This meant that when Homo sapiens spread into Europe and Asia, they did not merely replace Neanderthals, they mingled with them. Likewise, Denisovan DNA lives on in people of Melanesia, Tibet, and parts of Asia, sometimes providing useful traits such as adaptation to high altitudes. The picture that emerges is one of complexity. Instead of a pure line of descent, humanity is a tapestry of interwoven threads. Our ancestors did not walk alone. They met others, shared lives, exchanged genes. Every person alive today carries within them the record of those meetings. Mainstream science reads this as confirmation of evolution. DNA not only supports the idea of common ancestry with primates, it fills in gaps left by fossils. But even within this triumph, questions arise. The percentages of Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA vary among populations, raising debates about how extensive the interbreeding was. Some traits like immune responses and metabolism may have been shaped by those ancient exchanges. How much of what we call human is actually borrowed from cousins who vanished? More unsettling are the sudden leaps DNA hints at, but cannot fully explain. The cognitive revolution around 50,000 years ago, when humans began producing art ritual and complex tools, does not correspond neatly to a genetic breakthrough. No single mutation has been identified as the spark. Was it a gradual accumulation invisible in the genetic record, or does it suggest that DNA alone cannot capture the emergence of culture and consciousness? And DNA also carries mysteries. Some fragments within our genome have no clear origin, hinting at interbreeding with hominins, yet undiscovered. Could there be lost branches, unknown cousins, who left their mark in us, but whose bones remain buried, If Denisovans were revealed by a single bone, what others might still wait. Speculation thrives in the silences. Some argue that our genetic closeness to chimpanzees raises questions about why the difference in behavior and culture is so vast. How can a 1% difference in DNA separate cave art from termite fishing symphonies from leaf nests? Others turn this gap into fuel for alternative theories: intelligent design, divine spark intervention beyond Earth. These ideas remain outside mainstream science, but they show how DNA, while powerful, does not settle every question. The more we learn, the more complex the picture becomes. The genome is not a straight script, but a palimpsest written and rewritten over millennia. It contains evidence of survival and extinction of love and violence, of chance encounters in caves and valleys. It is at once intimate and impersonal. So we return to the frozen cave in Siberia, to the fragment of bone that revealed an entire people. DNA has given us voices where fossils were silent stories, where bones were mute. Yet even in its clarity, it leaves questions unanswered. How complete is our genetic record? How many secrets lie in sequences still undeciphered? We know now that our DNA ties us to chimps, to Neanderthals, to Denisovans, to a shared tree of life. But does it tell us who we are, or only what we are made of? The code in our cells is both evidence and enigma. It confirms kinship, but it does not resolve meaning. The double helix twists like a spiral staircase, inviting us upward. But where the staircase leads remains unknown. Each step reveals more of our ancestry, yet the destination is hidden in shadow. DNA has spoken, but the final word is not yet written. In a quiet museum storeroom, drawers slide open to reveal fragments of bone teeth, the size of pebbles, splinters of jaw, shards of skull. Each piece is labeled, cataloged, preserved. Yet for all the care, the collection is astonishingly thin. Across millions of years of human evolution, the actual fossil record could fit into a few cabinets. This is the raw material on which we build the story of our origins. From such fragments, scientists reconstruct entire lineages, draft diagrams of descent, and draw portraits of ancient ancestors. But the gaps between the bones are vast. The fossil record is by its nature incomplete. To become a fossil is rare. Most creatures vanish without a trace. They decay, are scavenged, or dissolve into soil. Only under unusual conditions, rapid burial, the absence of oxygen mineral replacement, does bone survive long enough to turn to stone. Even then, erosion, earthquakes, and floods can erase or scatter remains. The result is a record full of silences. Mainstream science acknowledges these gaps openly. Paleontologists speak of missing links not as proof against evolution, but as evidence of the rarity of preservation. The story of life is written in stone, but most of its pages have been torn out. What survives are fragments enough to sketch outlines, but not enough to draw a seamless picture. Take Australopithecus. We have Lucy and a handful of others. They show us bipedalism, a crucial step. But between Lucy living 3.2 million years ago and the emergence of Homo habilis nearly a million years later, the record is sparse. What species bridge the gap? How did brains and large tools develop societies shift? The fossils are largely silent. Or consider the transition from Homo erectus to Homo sapiens. Homo erectus thrived for over 1 million years, spreading from Africa to Asia. Then about 300,000 years ago, anatomically modern humans appear. What happened in between fossils hint at intermediate forms, species like Homo heidelbergensis or Homo rhodesiensis, but the evidence is fragmentary, debated, sometimes reclassified as new finds emerge. The bridge between erectus and sapiens remains contested ground. Even the Neanderthals, whose bones are more plentiful, leave questions. We know they interbred with humans, but the exact nature of their disappearance is uncertain. Did climate shifts doom them? Did competition with Homo sapiens drive them out? Or did assimilation mean they never fully vanished? The fossils offer clues, but no definitive answer. These gaps are not small. They span tens or hundreds of thousands of years, periods in which crucial developments must have occurred. Fire language, symbolic thought, ritual, burial. These are markers of humanity, but their origins are difficult to pin down because the fossils are missing. The gaps also leave space for mistakes and misinterpretations. In the early 20th century, the infamous Piltdown Man filled a gap with fraud. For 40 years, scientists believed in a skull that combined human and ape features. It was only in 1953 that careful analysis revealed it as a hoax. Other errors were more innocent, a tooth mistaken for a hominin, later identified as belonging to a pig. Each misstep was born from the hunger to close the gaps, to fill the silences with certainty. This hunger shapes not only science, but culture. The familiar image of human evolution, a line of figures marching from stooped ape to upright man, arose not from fossils, but from imagination. It simplifies a story riddled with absences into a smooth, satisfying progression. It comforts by suggesting inevitability that humans were destined to appear. But the fossil record itself resists that comfort. It shows a tangled bush of species, many of them dead ends, their bones lost or never preserved. Some scholars embrace the incompleteness as part of the process. They argue that science thrives in the gaps, that each discovery is valuable precisely because it is rare. Others caution that the gaps make our narratives fragile, open to distortion. When only fragments survive, interpretation becomes as important as evidence, and the gaps invite speculation. Some ask whether sudden leaps in the record, such as the rapid expansion of brain size or the abrupt flowering of symbolic culture, can be explained solely by gradual evolution. The absence of transitional fossils fuels alternative theories that evolution occurs in punctuated bursts rather than slow continuity, or that forces beyond natural selection played a role. Mainstream paleontology offers explanations. The theory of punctuated equilibrium, proposed by Stephen Jay Gould and Niles Eldredge in the 1970s, suggests that species remain stable for long periods, then change rapidly in geological terms, often triggered by environmental shifts. This could explain why the fossil record shows sudden appearances rather than smooth transitions. But critics argue that the gaps still leave room for doubt. Outside science, the gaps become fertile ground for more speculative ideas. Some propose intelligent design, arguing that the absence of gradual transitions points to purposeful intervention. Others stretch further, suggesting extraterrestrial influence visitors who altered human DNA, leaving leaps that fossils cannot explain. These ideas lack empirical support, but their persistence shows how silence invites imagination. What is undeniable is that the fossil record is a patchwork. Each discovery alters the picture, sometimes dramatically. The Hobbit of Flores, the Denisovans of Siberia, the unexpected finds in Morocco all reshape the timeline. What else lies buried, waiting to rewrite the story again? The cabinets in the museum hold precious bones, but they also hold absence. For every fragment we display, countless others are gone. The silence of those missing bones echoes louder than the fossils themselves. So we ask, how much of our story is real and how much is reconstruction? Are we confident that the narrative from ape-like ancestors to modern humans is continuous? Or are we filling chasms with educated guesses? The missing pages remain, and with them the possibility that our story is stranger, more fragmented than we dare admit. The fossil record is both proof and question. It proves that beings before us walked, lived, and died, but it questions how much of the path we can truly trace. The gaps are not empty, they are full of uncertainty. And in that uncertainty, the story of human origins remains unfinished. In the flickering light of a cave, a hand presses against stone. Fine powder of ochre is blown across fingers, leaving a red outline on the wall. Tens of thousands of years later, the print is still there, a silent declaration: I was here. This moment, simple, human, eternal, marks a threshold. For the first time, evidence shows that our ancestors were not only surviving, but symbolizing, imagining, expressing. Archaeologists call it the cognitive revolution, a period roughly 50 to 70,000 years ago, when Homo sapiens began to display behaviors that look strikingly like our own. Cave paintings appear in Chauvet and Lascaux, in France, in Altamira, in Spain, in Sulawesi, in Indonesia. Carvings of animals and figurines, such as the Lion Man of Hohensteinstadel in Germany, blend reality with imagination. Beads and pendants crafted from shells and bones hint at decoration, identity, even ritual. Burial sites show bodies placed with care, sometimes with flowers, pigments, or tools. Mainstream anthropology interprets these findings as evidence of a mental leap. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans made tools, but left little sign of symbolic thought. Then, seemingly abruptly, culture blossomed. Language grew complex, art flourished, societies expanded. The shift is so pronounced that scholars describe it as a revolution in cognition. What drove it? Explanations vary. Some point to genetic change. A mutation might have altered brain structures, perhaps enabling more sophisticated language. Others emphasize social dynamics. As human groups grew larger, communication cooperation and storytelling became essential for survival. Still others note environmental pressures, ice ages, shifting climates that forced adaptation and innovation. The evidence is compelling. Around 50,000 years ago, humans spread rapidly across the globe. They crossed seas to reach Australia, a feat demanding not only tools, but planning, cooperation, and imagination. They entered Europe where they encountered Neanderthals and eventually replaced them. Everywhere they went, art and artifacts appeared. But the leap raises questions. Why then, and not earlier, Homo erectus had mastered fire nearly a million years ago? Neanderthals crafted tools, cared for their injured, and may have buried their dead. Yet their cultural expression seems limited compared to the sudden explosion associated with Homo sapiens. Was the revolution truly unique to our species, or have we underestimated the capacities of others? Some scholars argue that the distinction is overdrawn. Evidence now suggests that Neanderthals painted caves in Spain, made jewelry from eagle talons, and used pigments. If true symbolic thought was not exclusive to Homo sapiens, perhaps what we call a revolution was instead a gradual buildup across species finally reaching a tipping point. Others hold to the idea of a singular spark. They note the scale and diversity of artifacts linked to Homo sapiens far exceeding anything found with Neanderthals. The complexity of symbolic culture, myth, religion, art appears to bloom suddenly as if a light switched on. This suddenness invites speculation. Some suggest that symbolic thought may not emerge gradually at all, but requires a threshold of brain complexity. Once language passed a certain point, abstract thought, art, and ritual became inevitable. Others lean toward chance, a fortunate mutation that spread quickly, reshaping cognition. And then there are ideas beyond mainstream science. Advocates of intelligent design claim that such a leap cannot be explained by a slow evolution alone. Writers at the fringes of anthropology propose intervention, perhaps from beings beyond Earth or from forces we cannot yet measure. These notions remain speculative, unsupported by empirical data, but they show how the gap in explanation fuels imagination. Still within the scientific consensus, the revolution is framed as cultural as much as biological. Culture itself can accelerate evolution. Once humans began sharing stories, knowledge, and techniques, ideas could outpace genetics. A single innovation such as the bow and arrow could spread across generations without waiting for DNA to change. The brain became not just an organ, but a platform for cumulative culture. Artifacts reveal this cumulative power. At Blombos Cave in South Africa, archaeologists discovered engraved ochre and shell beads dated to about 75,000 years ago, evidence of symbolism before the European cave paintings. At Sungir in Russia, burials from 30,000 years ago contain thousands of beads sewn into garments, a staggering investment of time and labor. These finds suggest that symbolic culture was not sudden everywhere, but emerged unevenly, flowering in different places at different times. The revolution also reshaped relationships. With complex language, humans could coordinate hunts, share myths, plan migrations. Storytelling may have been as crucial as fire. Myths bind communities, explain the unknown, and inspire cooperation. In this sense, the cognitive revolution was not only about art, but about society itself. And yet mystery lingers. If culture was the driver, why did it ignite when it did? Why not earlier, given that anatomically modern humans existed long before the revolution? The silence of earlier periods leaves us wondering if the record is incomplete or if something truly extraordinary occurred. Some scholars, like Yuval Harari, describe the revolution as the defining event that made Homo sapiens unique, the ability to imagine things that do not exist, gods, nations, laws, futures. Others caution that this narrative risks exaggeration. Evidence of Neanderthal creativity suggests that symbolic thought was more widespread, though perhaps less explosive. The debate reflects deeper tensions. Are humans exceptional, or are we one branch among many with degrees of creativity? Does art separate us or connect us? The cognitive revolution can be read both as a story of triumph and as a reminder of our kinship with others. The cave handprint remains silent and eloquent. It tells us that someone long ago wanted to mark existence, to declare presence, to reach across time. It is proof of imagination, but not of its cause. Was it a genetic twist, a cultural wave, or something beyond our comprehension? The print does not say. So we leave the cave with questions. The revolution is visible in pigment and stone, but its origins are hidden. Was it gradual, shared across species, or sudden sparked in our line alone? The evidence is suggestive but incomplete. The handprint is both a beginning and a mystery. It speaks of minds like ours, yet it leaves unanswered why and how those minds awaken. The revolution in thought may be the most important moment in human history, but it is also one of the least understood. In the twilight of a European valley about 40,000 years ago, two children play near a fire. Their features are not quite like ours. Their brows are heavier, their noses broader, their bodies stockier, adapted for cold winters. Yet their laughter, their games, their gestures are unmistakably human. These are Neanderthal children, part of a people who thrived in Europe and Western Asia for hundreds of thousands of years. For much of history, we believe their story ended in extinction. But in truth, their story continues inside us. The first Neanderthal bones were discovered in 1856 in Germany's Neander Valley, hence the name. At first, scholars argued over what they represented: a deformed modern human, a primitive species. Gradually, evidence mounted that Neanderthals were a distinct lineage, close cousins to Homo sapiens. They lived from Spain to Siberia, enduring ice ages, hunting with spears, caring for their sick. Their brains were as large as, or even larger than ours. For decades, the prevailing image of Neanderthals was unflattering. They were depicted as brutish, dim-witted cavemen, destined to be replaced by smarter Homo sapiens. Museums displayed reconstructions with stooped postures and vacant eyes. This image suited a story of progress: we survived because we were superior, they perished because they were not. But this story began to crack. Archaeological discoveries showed Neanderthals making tools, controlling fire, and burying their dead. In Shanidar Cave in Iraq, a skeleton was found with traces of pollen, suggesting flowers placed in a burial, evidence of ritual or care. In Spain, cave paintings dated to more than 60,000 years ago may have been made by Neanderthals, predating the arrival of modern humans. Far from dull, they appear to have been capable of symbolic thought. The decisive revelation came with DNA. In 2010, scientists sequenced the Neanderthal genome from bones found in Croatia. To their astonishment, they discovered that all modern humans outside Africa carry about 1 to 4% Neanderthal DNA. This meant that our ancestors did not simply replace Neanderthals, they encountered them, lived alongside them, and interbred. The old narrative of replacement gave way to one of entanglement. The implications are profound. Traits in our own biology trace back to Neanderthals. Some genes influence immune systems, helping us resist pathogens in Eurasia. Others affect metabolism, hair, and skin. In some cases, Neanderthal DNA has been linked to vulnerabilities, susceptibility to depression or diabetes. Their legacy is written in our bodies, for better or worse. But the interbreeding raises questions. How common was it? Were these encounters rare, occasional unions, or more sustained blending of communities? Genetic evidence suggests multiple episodes in different regions. In Siberia's Denisova cave, DNA revealed an individual whose mother was Neanderthal and father Denisovan, proof of direct hybridization among different hominin groups. Such discoveries suggest a tangled web of relationships rather than clean separations. What then caused the Neanderthals' disappearance about 40,000 years ago? Theories abound. Climate shifts may have reduced their habitats. Competition with Homo sapiens, who arrived in Europe around the same time, may have strained resources. Some argue that assimilation through interbreeding means Neanderthals never truly vanished, they became part of us. The answer may be a combination of all these. Yet uncertainty lingers. If Neanderthals were intelligent, adaptable, and capable of symbolic culture, why did they not survive as a distinct group? Was there some subtle advantage that Homo sapiens possessed, perhaps, in language and cooperation, in innovation, that allowed us to outlast them? Or was survival a matter of chance, a roll of the evolutionary dice? The debate reflects larger questions about human uniqueness. If Neanderthals buried their dead, painted caves, cared for the weak, then the boundary between them and us is thinner than once believed. Are we exceptional or merely one of several human species lucky to endure? The presence of their DNA within us complicates the narrative. We are not pure Homo sapiens. We are hybrids carrying echoes of others. Outside the scientific consensus, speculation grows. Some frame the disappearance of Neanderthals as evidence of violence, suggesting that Homo sapiens exterminated them. Others imagine peaceful coexistence, even shared myths and rituals. A few more speculative voices suggest that sudden cultural leaps in Homo sapiens art, religion, technology might have been influenced by encounters with Neanderthals or Denisovans, an exchange of ideas as well as genes. But fossils and genomes cannot tell us the texture of those encounters. Were they acts of love, curiosity, coercion, necessity? We cannot know. The DNA only tells us that bodies met, that lines blurred. The human story is not one of isolation, but of mingling, sometimes gentle, sometimes harsh. And in this mingling lies a challenge to our identity. For centuries, we sought purity in origins, a line of descent that placed us apart. Now science shows the opposite. We are composites, mosaics of lineages. The categories of species that once seemed clear become porous, complicated, human in every sense of the word. So we stand before the Neanderthal bones with new eyes. They are not strangers, not failures of evolution, but kin whose legacy survives in our blood. Their disappearance is not total, but partial, absorbed into the tapestry of who we are. Yet the question remains, why them, not us? Why did one branch persist while another faded? Was it language cooperation, creativity, or the contingencies of climate and chance? The bones are silent, the DNA precise but incomplete. The fire in that ancient valley has long gone cold. The children are gone, their laughter extinguished. But their descendants walk among us, hidden in our genomes, resurfacing in every strand of DNA. We are in part Neanderthal. We are in part others we have yet to name. The boundary between survival and extinction is razor thin. And as we look at the fate of Neanderthals, we must ask, if they vanished despite intelligence and resilience, what assurance do we have that our own story is secure? The skeleton lay in the Ethiopian soil for 4.4 million years, crushed flat by rock and time. When it was first uncovered in the 1990s, the bones were so fragile that scientists spent more than a decade painstakingly reconstructing them in laboratories grain by grain, like restoring a shattered mosaic. When at last the figure was revealed, it was given a name, Ardipithecus remedus. To the scientific community, it was like opening a sealed chapter of a forgotten book and discovering that the words did not fit the story we thought we knew. Ardi, as she came to be called, was startling. Standing about 120 centimeters tall, weighing around 50 kilograms, she was no ordinary ape. Her pelvis and feet suggested she could walk upright on the ground, yet her opposable big toe allowed her to grasp branches and climb trees with ease. Her skull showed a small brain, no larger than that of a chimpanzee, but the overall anatomy was unlike modern apes or early humans. She was something else, something in between, yet not in the way textbooks had taught. For decades, many scientists assumed that the last common ancestor between humans and chimpanzees looked more like a chimp knuckle-walking tree-dwelling with traits that gradually evolved toward upright walking. But Ardi disrupted this vision. Her skeleton suggested that knuckle-walking may have been a later adaptation of chimpanzees, not an ancestral trait. In other words, our lineage may never have passed through a chimp-like stage at all. This was unsettling. The neat image of a march from knuckle-walking ape to upright human dissolved. Instead, the path seemed stranger. Ardi walked upright but awkwardly. She climbed but differently than chimps. She was not simply a midpoint on a line from ape to human. She was her own form, her own way of being. Mainstream interpretations place Ardi as one of the earliest known hominins, living about 4.4 million years ago, predating Lucy by over 1 million years. Her existence pushes the timeline of upright walking further back than previously thought. She also suggests that the split between humans and chimpanzees was not a clean divergence from a chimp-like ancestor, but from something more complex, less familiar. The discovery forced scientists to reconsider assumptions. If Ardi was partly upright, partly arboreal, then the evolution of bipedalism may not have been a simple adaptation to open savannas as once believed. It may have developed in woodland environments among trees and grasslands mixed together. The story of how and why humans began walking on two legs, once thought straightforward, became complicated again. Ardi is not alone in causing trouble. Other fossils such as Sahelanthropus chidensis from Chad about 7 million years old and Auroran from Kenya about 6 million years old also hint at early bipedalism in creatures far older than expected. Each discovery stretches the timeline further back, making the picture fuzzier rather than clearer. The debates are fierce. Some researchers argue that Ardi is indeed a hominin directly related to the human line. Others question whether she belongs on our branch at all, suggesting she might be a cousin rather than an ancestor. The evidence is fragmentary, the interpretations contested. What makes Ardi especially puzzling is how she breaks the mold of expectation. For years, scientists assumed the evolutionary path was linear, ape-like, to less ape-like to human. Ardi suggests a branching story where traits like upright walking may have appeared in unexpected forms, later lost, or altered in other lineages. Evolution, rather than a straight climb, looks more like an experiment with multiple variations. This challenges not only the narrative of progression, but also the comfort of clarity. If Ardi was not on the way to us, then what was she? A cousin who vanished, a failed experiment of evolution, or a reminder that the path to humanity was not inevitable, but contingent, shaped by chance as much as by adaptation. The fossil also sparked larger questions. If chimpanzees are not accurate models of our ancestor, then much of what we thought we knew must be revised. We often compare human behavior to that of chimps, seeing in their violence alliances and intelligence a mirror of our past. But what if the mirror is distorted? What if the true ancestor was unlike both chimps and humans, a form we can scarcely imagine? Speculation grows in the gaps. Some argue that the complexity revealed by Ardi suggests evolution was experimenting with multiple body plans, multiple ways of living before our lineage stabilized. Others push further, wondering if sudden leaps in form and function hint at unknown forces, perhaps rapid environmental pressures, perhaps chance mutations, perhaps something less tangible. Outside the mainstream, Ardi has been seized upon by alternative theorists as evidence that human evolution is not as simple as textbooks claim. Some argue that the strangeness of her anatomy suggests intervention or lost branches that science has yet to recognize. These ideas remain speculative, but they show how discoveries that challenge assumptions can ignite imagination beyond the academy. Still within the scientific consensus, Ardi stands as a crucial figure. She reminds us that human evolution is not a straight march, but a mosaic. She complicates the picture, but in doing so, she brings it closer to reality. Her bones whisper that the story of our origins is less tidy, more tangled than we once believed. So we return to the lab where her skeleton lies reconstructed. Each bone is delicate, fragile, painstakingly preserved. Together, they form a being who lived millions of years ago, whose footsteps have long vanished, yet whose presence still unsettles us. What do we make of her? Is she ancestor, cousin, or stranger? Does she tell us where we came from, or only remind us how much we do not know? Ardi is both revelation and riddle. She opens a door into deep time, but the room beyond is dim, filled with shadows. And in those shadows, the question lingers, if even our earliest steps are uncertain, how much of the story we tell ourselves. Can we trust Ardi's bones, fragile as glass, hold not answers, but the silence of deep time? It is we who give them meaning, and in doing so reveal both our hunger for clarity and the limits of what we can know. In a windswept plain of Kenya, a shard of stone catches the sunlight. To the untrained eye, it looks like a jagged pebble, but in the hands of an archaeologist, the edges reveal intention. The angles are too sharp, the flakes too deliberate. This is not an accident of erosion, but the trace of a hand, a mind shaping stone into tool. That mind lived nearly 2 million years ago. The stone is mute, but it is also a message, a kind of time machine. Every tool is a small experiment preserved in silence until we uncover it. Archaeology often feels like conducting experiments across time. Each object, stone, bone, fire pit becomes a clue to how minds worked in worlds long gone. From chipped flints to painted caves, artifacts form the bridge between biology and culture, between the body and the imagination. If fossils tell us what our ancestors were, artifacts hint at what they thought. The earliest stone tools, known as Oldowan, appear about 2.6 million years ago in East Africa. They are simple flakes, cores, and choppers, sharp enough to cut meat, crack bones, scrape hides. Crude, yes, but revolutionary. For the first time, humans or their ancestors extended their bodies with tools. The environment became something not only endured but reshaped. Later, the Acheulean tradition brought hand axes, symmetrical teardrop-shaped stones, found from Africa to Europe and Asia dating back 1.7 million years. These tools required planning skill and aesthetic sense. To make one was to imagine a shape hidden within stone and to bring it out with precision. Some hand axes are so large or so refined that scholars wonder if they serve symbolic purposes, not just practical ones. Fire was another experiment with time. Hearths from sites like Gesher Beno Yaakov in Israel, dated to about 780,000 years ago, show that Homo erectus and their descendants controlled flames. Fire transformed food, making it digestible and safer. It reshaped sleep, offering warmth and protection. It became the center of gatherings, the first theater, where stories might have been told in shadows against rock walls. Artifacts also capture the origins of art. In Blombos Cave in South Africa, pieces of ochre engraved with cross-hatch patterns, dated to about 75,000 years ago, suggest abstract thought before the great cave paintings of Europe. Beads fashioned from shells, pigments ground from minerals, figurines carved from ivory, all are experiments in symbolism. They show minds reaching beyond survival into meaning. Mainstream science interprets these artifacts as evidence of gradual cultural evolution. Tools grew more sophisticated, fire, more controlled art, more widespread. Each stage marks not only technological skill, but cognitive expansion. Planning, cooperation, and imagination left material traces that we can still hold. Yet interpretation is not simple. Why, for example, did hand axes remain virtually unchanged for over 1 million years? Was this conservatism, stability, or a lack of innovation? Some argue that long stretches of stasis, punctuated by bursts of creativity, suggest that cultural evolution, like biological evolution, occurs in fits and starts. Others wonder whether the tools we have found represent only a fraction of what was made with perishable items like wood and fiber lost to time. The silence of absence complicates the picture. Did our ancestors weave nets, build rafts, craft musical instruments that vanished before fossilization? A bone flute from Germany, dated to 40,000 years ago, shows that music already existed. How much earlier did melodies fill the air, now irretrievably gone? Artifacts also blur lines between species. Neanderthals, once thought culturally inferior, left behind tools, pigments, ornaments, and perhaps art. Were they copying Homo sapiens or innovating independently? Did symbolic culture arise multiple times or only once, spreading across groups through contact? The record is suggestive but incomplete. These questions leave room for speculation. Some see the sudden flowering of art and symbolism as inexplicable by gradual development. They argue that the leap into imagination represents something beyond survival, a mystery in itself. Others point to evidence of gradual accumulation, with each innovation building on the last. The debate reflects the broader tension between continuity and rupture in human origins. Outside the mainstream, artifacts have inspired even wilder theories. Some claim that the precision of certain stone tools suggests knowledge beyond their time. Others interpret cave art as records of encounters with beings not of this world. These views remain speculative, but they show how objects from deep time invite meaning far beyond their immediate function. But perhaps the most profound realization is that artifacts connect us across the abyss of time. When we hold a stone tool, we touch the gesture of a hand long vanished. When we gaze at a painted bison, we share in the imagination of a mind 30,000 years old. Archaeology is not only about evidence, it is about empathy, about seeing ourselves in the shadows of others. And yet humility remains. For every artifact preserved, countless others are lost. The archaeological record is as fragmentary as the fossil record. We reconstruct cultures from a handful of objects, inferring worlds from scraps. Our certainty is always provisional, always awaiting the next discovery that will shift the story again. So we return to the plain of Kenya, to the shard of stone glinting in the sun. It is small, but it carries weight. It tells us that someone long ago paused to shape the world with intention. That intention ripples forward through hand axes, through fire, through art, through the tools in our hands today. Artifacts are experiments across time, messages cast forward into futures the makers could not imagine. They remind us that the story of humanity is written not only in genes and bones, but in objects, symbols, and imagination. But they also remind us of absence. For all we have found, there is infinitely more we have not. What tools, what songs, what rituals lie forever erased? And what does that mean for the story we tell ourselves now? The stone is evidence, but also a question. It proves we shaped the world, but it cannot tell us why. In its silence, we glimpse both our ingenuity and our ignorance. In a glass case in the Natural History Museum of London for decades, visitors leaned in to gaze at the darkened bones of a figure that seemed to bridge the abyss between ape and human. They were told this was a missing link, proof that Darwin's theory held true. The skull became an icon, a relic of science's progress. Yet behind the reverence lay a fraud. The so-called Piltdown Man, discovered in England in 1912, was not an ancient ancestor at all, but a deception, a medieval human skull fused with the jaw of an orangutan, its teeth filed down to mimic wear. For 40 years it stood as evidence, shaping textbooks and arguments until in 1953, modern techniques exposed it as a forgery. The Piltdown hoax is perhaps the most infamous example of how human error and human ambition can distort the story of our origins. It reveals not only the vulnerability of science to deception, but also the hunger for certainty that makes us believe too quickly. The desire to find the missing link was so strong that even seasoned scientists overlooked inconsistencies. For 4 decades, a false ancestor shaped public imagination. But Piltdown was not the only misstep. In 1922, a single tooth found in Nebraska was hailed as belonging to an early human dubbed Nebraska Man. Illustrated reconstructions showed entire families based on this fragment. Later analysis revealed the tooth belonged not to a hominin, but to an extinct species of peccary, a kind of wild pig. The episode became a cautionary tale of overinterpretation, a reminder of how little can be built on fragments. Other errors were more subtle. Fossils once attributed to one species were later reclassified as another. Hominins thought to represent distinct branches turned out to be variations within a single group. As new evidence emerges, classifications shift, diagrams of human evolution redrawn. This is not fraud, but the normal turbulence of science. Yet to the public, it can appear as confusion, instability, even contradiction. Mainstream science acknowledges these mistakes openly. Peer review, replication, and new technologies gradually correct errors. Radiocarbon dating, DNA sequencing, and isotopic analysis have overturned earlier claims, refining timelines and relationships. But the history of paleoanthropology is filled with moments when the desire for discovery ran ahead of evidence. These missteps open the door for skepticism. Critics of evolution point to Piltdown and Nebraska Man as evidence that the field is built on shaky ground. They argue that if such frauds and errors could persist for decades, how reliable is the story at all? Scientists respond that correction is part of the process, that science is self-correcting over time. Still, the scars of these episodes linger, fueling doubts and conspiracies. Beyond fraud and error lies interpretation. Fossils do not speak. They must be read, and readings are influenced by assumptions. The iconic image of human evolution, ape to caveman to modern man, is itself a construction born not of fossils, but of cultural imagination. Each fossil discovery is slotted into this framework, reinforcing a narrative of progress. But what if the framework is misleading? What if evolution is not a march, but a web with branches, dead ends, and overlaps? Speculation grows in these spaces. Some argue that the eagerness to find ancestors leads to confirmation bias, seeing transitional forms where none exist. Others suggest that the gaps in the record invite overreach, creating stories that may later collapse. Outside the mainstream, these vulnerabilities feed alternative theories that science hides the truth, that discoveries are manipulated, that human origins are stranger than admitted. Yet it would be wrong to dismiss the entire field because of its failures. Every science has its errors, its corrections, its blind alleys. What makes paleoanthropology distinct is how little evidence survives, how much must be inferred from scraps. The temptation to overstate is strong, but so too is the drive to revise when new evidence emerges. Piltdown was eventually exposed not by critics outside the field, but by scientists within it. Still, the history of fraud and error reminds us that the story of human origins is fragile provisional. For the public, each revelation, Piltdown's exposure. Nebraska man's collapse feels like betrayal. For scientists, it is the slow grinding of truth through layers of mistake. But between these perspectives lies a tension, how to balance confidence with humility, narrative with uncertainty. The danger is not fraud alone. It is the human hunger for closure. We want the story of our origins to be settled, to be neat. We crave ancestors. We can name lineages. We can draw diagrams. We can print in textbooks. Fraud thrives where desire outpaces evidence, where certainty is demanded from fragments. And so we return to the Piltdown skull, darkened with age, filed and stained to deceive. It reminds us not only of fraud, but of our willingness to believe. It shows how fragile authority can be, how easily trust can be misplaced. It warns us that the story of human evolution is not immune to ambition, error, or even deliberate lies. But does that mean the story is false, or only that it is unfinished, vulnerable human? The answer depends on how we read the bones, how we weigh the evidence, how we guard against our own biases. The cabinets of museums hold both triumph and failure. They hold Lucy and Artie, but also Piltdown and Nebraska. They hold truth and error side by side. The lesson is humility. The history of human origins is not a straight path of discovery, but a tangled journey of mistakes, corrections, revelations, and deceptions. Science advances, but it advances through error as much as through insight. So we ask, when we look at the bones in glass cases, how much of what we see is evidence, and how much is interpretation, how much is truth, and how much is story? The line between knowledge and illusion is thin. And in that space, the question lingers: do we truly know our origins, or are we still vulnerable to the next beautiful lie? A lion roars across the savannah. Herds scatter, birds take flight. Among the grass and acacia trees, a small band of humans huddles together. Their weapons are crude, their bodies vulnerable. And yet they are about to unleash something no predator has ever wielded before: imagination. In a few thousand years, an instant in geological time, these fragile beings will build cities, carve cathedrals, send rockets into space. No other species on Earth has leapt so far so fast. The question haunts us: how did it happen? Mainstream science explains much of our rise through gradual processes: larger brains, better tools, cooperative societies. But the speed of transformation troubles even experts. Within a relatively short window, Homo sapiens went from surviving in small groups to reshaping the planet. Our intelligence is not just an adaptation, it is an outlier, an anomaly, something that seems to exceed the slow rhythms of natural selection. Brains began to enlarge long before our cultural explosion. Homo erectus, nearly 2 million years ago, had a brain size roughly double that of earlier hominins. Neanderthals possessed brains as large as ours. And yet they did not build civilizations. They left tools, art, perhaps rituals, but nothing on the scale of what modern humans achieved. This raises a mystery: why did our lineage alone cross a threshold that others did not? Some scientists suggested language was the catalyst. Complex speech allowed us to share knowledge, coordinate hunts, and transmit ideas across generations. Unlike genetic evolution, cultural information accumulates rapidly. A single innovation, such as fire or agriculture, can spread widely without waiting for DNA to change. Language may have turned human minds into a collective network, amplifying intelligence through communication. Others emphasize sociality. Humans are not the strongest predators, but we are uniquely cooperative. Anthropologist Michael Tomasello argues that shared intentionality, the ability to work toward common goals, sets us apart. This cooperation, combined with imagination, allowed us to dominate environments far larger than our bodies could control. Still, the leap seems startling. The transition from stone flakes to symphonies, from cave paintings to quantum physics, is immense. Some scholars call this the great anomaly of evolution. Why should one species of ape produce Shakespeare and spacecraft while others with similar brains did not? Speculation thrives in the gap. One explanation is chance, a fortuitous mutation, perhaps affecting brain wiring, that tipped our species over the edge. Another is cumulative culture: small advantages snowballed, leading to compounding growth. Still others point to environmental stress, ice ages, shifting climates that forced rapid adaptation. But there are voices that reach beyond the naturalistic frame. Advocates of intelligent design argue that human intelligence shows hallmarks of purposeful shaping, too abrupt and too complex to be explained by gradual selection. Some go further, suggesting intervention, an external spark added to the human lineage, whether divine or extraterrestrial. These views are not accepted within mainstream science, but their persistence reflects the unease with which we confront our uniqueness. Even within anthropology, debates continue. Did Neanderthals truly lack our capacities, or have their traces been underestimated? Evidence of Neanderthal art and jewelry suggests they too were imaginative. Perhaps the difference was not in kind, but in scale, with Homo sapiens spreading more rapidly and widely tipping the balance of survival. If so, our exceptionalism may be less absolute than we assume. Genetics adds another wrinkle. Certain genes, such as FOXP2, are linked to language. Mutations in FOXP2 are associated with speech disorders in modern humans. Both Neanderthals and Denisovans carried similar versions of this gene, suggesting they too had the biological foundation for language. Why then did Homo sapiens alone develop full symbolic culture? The answer remains elusive. Philosophers approach the question differently. Consciousness itself, the inner world of thought, imagination, and self-awareness, resists explanation. Neuroscience can map brain activity, but it cannot yet explain why electrical impulses produce subjective experience. This hard problem of consciousness has led some to argue that human intelligence cannot be reduced to biology alone. Others caution against exaggeration. They point out that our intelligence is not perfect, it is riddled with biases, prone to error, vulnerable to illusion. Our dominance of the planet may say as much about luck and circumstance as about brilliance. Intelligence, they argue, is not a straight line upward, but a tangled interplay of biology, environment, and culture. And yet the scale of our impact is undeniable. Within a blink of time, we have altered the climate, reshaped ecosystems, and pushed species to extinction. Dinosaurs ruled for over 150 million years, yet they never built telescopes. Humans in less than 300,000 years have reached the moon. The contrast is stark, almost unsettling. This raises a haunting thought. Perhaps intelligence is not simply an adaptation, but a gamble. It grants power, but also peril. The very qualities that allow us to create art and science also enable us to build weapons capable of ending our story in an instant. Intelligence is both our triumph and our risk. Outside the scientific community, these reflections inspire myths and theories. Some suggest that our minds are tuned to dimensions beyond the material, that imagination itself is evidence of connection to something greater. Others propose that intelligence is not unique to Earth, but part of a cosmic pattern, with humans only one expression among many. These ideas remain speculative, but they show how the question of our minds reaches beyond biology into meaning. Returning to the savannah, the band of humans still huddles by the fire. They cannot know the future, the cities, the machines, the satellites, but they are already shaping it. Their tools are crude, their lives precarious, but their minds hold something vast. They are running an experiment. No other species has attempted the experiment of imagination. The results are everywhere. In the bones of mammoths hunted to extinction, in the pigments on cave walls, in the satellites circling above us now. Each is a trace of the same anomaly, minds that see not only what is, but what could be. And yet we remain uncertain. Was this leap inevitable, a natural culmination of evolution? Or was it improbable, a fragile accident that could easily not have occurred? If intelligence is so powerful, why has it not arisen elsewhere with the same intensity? Or has it, in species now gone, their traces lost to time? Our minds are both evidence and question. They prove that something extraordinary happened in our lineage, but they do not reveal why. They hint at purpose, but they do not confirm it. So we stand before the mirror of our own intellect, dazzled and unsettled. We can send probes to the edges of the solar system, but we cannot explain why we alone can imagine doing so. The story of human intelligence is not finished. It is an experiment still unfolding. And in its brilliance lies its fragility. The same minds that paint on cave walls and compose symphonies also build bombs and poison rivers. Our anomaly may yet prove our undoing. The fire on the savannah flickers, casting long shadows. In those shadows, the question remains, did we rise by chance, by gradual steps, by hidden hands, or by something we cannot yet name? The answer is obscured, but the evidence surrounds us in every tool, every word, every thought. Our minds are the greatest artifact of all, and the most mysterious. The cave wall is painted with strange figures, half human, half beast, surrounded by symbols we cannot decode. To archaeologists, it is art. To others, it is something else, evidence of encounters beyond this world. Theories flourish in the silence of prehistory. If fossils leave gaps, if DNA leaves mysteries, then imagination rushes to fill the void. And so arise the outside hypotheses, stories that drift at the edges of science, stories that reveal more about human longing than about evidence itself. The most persistent of these is the notion of ancient astronauts. Popularized in the 1960s by writers like Erich von Däniken, it suggests that beings from beyond Earth intervene in human evolution. According to this view, sudden leaps in culture, the construction of megaliths, the cognitive revolution, the rise of civilization cannot be explained by natural processes alone. They are instead the marks of contact of gifts or manipulations from advanced visitors. The theory draws on scattered clues, giant stone blocks at Giza and Baalbek, intricate Nazca lines in Peru, myths of sky gods descending to teach humanity. None of these provide scientific proof, but they resonate with the human taste for wonder. Mainstream archaeology rejects these claims. The pyramids were built with known technologies of labor and engineering. The Nazca lines were made by removing surface stones to reveal lighter soil beneath. Oral myths, while rich, cannot be treated as literal history. Yet the allure of the ancient astronaut remains. It reflects the sense that human leaps are too great to be ordinary, too sudden to be explained by patience alone. Another outside hypothesis is intelligent design. Unlike the extraterrestrial idea, this one arises often in religious contexts. It suggests that certain features of life, including human intelligence, are too complex to result from unguided evolution. They must instead be the product of design by God, by a higher power, by some purposeful intelligence. In academic science, intelligent design is not accepted. It is seen as a rephrasing of creationism. But in the public sphere, it has gained traction, particularly among communities uneasy with purely material explanations of life. Even within philosophy, the mystery of consciousness fuels speculation. Some argue that mind cannot be reduced to matter, that subjective experience points to a reality beyond biology. From this arises the idea that human uniqueness lies not in genes, but in spirit, in connection to dimensions we cannot measure. These arguments are not scientific in the narrow sense, but they tap into enduring questions about the nature of self and soul. There are also hypotheses drawn from myth. Ancient Sumerian texts, such as the Enuma Elish or the stories of the Anunnaki, have been read by some as records of extraterrestrial beings who shaped humanity. Hindu epics describe flying machines, the Vimanas, interpreted by some as evidence of lost technologies. Again, mainstream scholarship interprets these as symbolic, poetic, religious reflections of culture, not literal accounts. Yet their survival across millennia shows the power of the idea that we are not alone, that we were guided. Why do these outside theories persist? Partly because the gaps in evidence are real. Fossils are missing artifacts, incomplete explanations provisional. Where silence reigns, story rushes in. But also because these theories satisfy deep desires. They restore meaning to a world where evolution can feel blind, indifferent. They offer purpose, even grandeur, that humanity was chosen, shaped, visited, designed. For some, this restores dignity. For others, it fuels imagination. But for science, it raises challenges. How to respect curiosity without conceding to speculation? How to hold to evidence while acknowledging mystery? The balance is delicate. Speculation, however, is not without value. It can inspire research, new questions, even new discoveries. While the ancient astronaut theory lacks proof, its popularity pushed archaeologists to better explain how monuments were truly built. While intelligent design is not a scientific theory, it keeps alive philosophical debates about complexity and purpose. Even myths, when examined carefully, reveal how ancient peoples made sense of the unknown. Still, the danger's in confusion. If speculation is mistaken for evidence, if myth is mistaken for history, then understanding falters. The story of human origins must remain anchored in what can be tested while still leaving space for wonder. And perhaps that is the lesson of the outside hypotheses. They are mirrors of our own hunger. They show that humans are not content with bare survival or dry facts. We long for narratives that give shape, meaning, and drama to our existence. Whether through God's aliens or design, we search for a pattern that says our lives are not accidents. So we look again at the cave wall, at the hybrid figures painted in ochre. Are they gods, ancestors, spirits, or dreams? Are they memories of encounters with something other, or only the reflections of imagination? The answer may never be certain. What we do know is this: humans have always told stories beyond evidence. We have always reached for explanations that stretch past what bones and stones can say. The outside hypotheses are not proofs of origin, but proofs of our desire to belong to something larger. And so the question lingers: are these myths and speculations only fantasies, or do they point to truths not yet seen? The cave wall does not answer. It only holds its figures, half man, half beast, waiting for us to decide what they mean. A man kneels beside an ancient grave. In the soil lie the bones of someone who died 100,000 years ago. Around the skeleton are objects, shell beads, ochre pigment, perhaps the remains of flowers. It is not a practical act. The dead cannot eat, cannot use ornaments. It is something else: ritual, reverence, grief, hope. In this moment we glimpse not only biology, but philosophy. The questions of meaning, mortality, and purpose did not begin in Greece or India. They began wherever humans first looked at the dead and wondered. The story of human origins is usually told in bones and genes, but behind it lie questions those bones and genes cannot answer. If we are the product of evolution, if we share ancestors with apes, then what does that mean for morality, for consciousness, for the soul? If our intelligence is an anomaly, what does that say about our place in the cosmos? These are not scientific questions alone. They are philosophical, ethical, spiritual. Mainstream science draws a careful line. Evolution explains the development of traits, behaviors, and capacities. It does not pronounce on meaning. Richard Dawkins famously wrote that evolution is blind, pitiless, indifferent. From this view, human values are cultural inventions, not cosmic truths. We are clever animals who construct morality for survival, not because the universe demands it. Yet this view unsettles. If morality is only invention, why does it feel binding? If consciousness is only chemistry, why does it feel profound? Across cultures, humans have resisted reduction. Ancient Greek philosophers spoke of the logos, the rational principle behind reality. Indian traditions spoke of Atman, the self that transcends the body. Religious narratives offered creation stories that placed humans at the center, chosen by gods, bearers of purpose. The clash between evolutionary science and traditional philosophy is stark. Evolution places us among animals. Philosophy often elevates us above them. One insists on continuity, the other on uniqueness. And yet both confront the same riddle: what does it mean to be human? Consider consciousness. Neuroscience maps brain activity, linking thoughts to neurons. But the subjective experience, the redness of red, the ache of grief, the wonder of beauty, remains unexplained. This hard problem of consciousness, articulated by philosopher David Chalmers, resists reduction. If our minds are entirely products of evolution, why should they produce inner life at all? Why not only reflex in behavior or consider morality? Evolutionary psychologists argue that cooperation, empathy, and fairness evolved because they aided survival. Groups with trust and altruism outcompeted those without. But does this explanation exhaust morality? Is justice only strategy, or does it reflect something deeper? Plato argued for eternal forms, Kant for universal duties, religions for divine law. If morality is only adaptive, these traditions lose their foundation. If it is more evolution, does not explain it all. Language adds another layer. Its complexity, symbolism, and creativity go far beyond practical needs. Poetry, philosophy, myth. These are not strictly necessary for survival. Why then do they exist? Some argue they are byproducts of intelligence, spandrels of evolution. Others see them as signs that human life points beyond itself toward meaning not captured by utility. This tension fuels ongoing debate. Naturalists argue that everything about us can be explained by natural selection and cultural evolution. Dualists and spiritualists argue that something transcendent is present soul spirit consciousness beyond matter. Between them lies uncertainty, a space where science ends and philosophy begins. Speculation grows. Some suggest that human self-awareness is a trick of evolution, an illusion that helps us survive. Others argue that self-awareness is evidence of participation in something greater, perhaps even cosmic consciousness. These ideas remain outside mainstream science, but they show how deeply the philosophical dimension runs. And then there is the question of purpose. Evolution is not teleological, it has no goal. Species adapt or vanish with no destiny written in stone. Yet humans continually seek purpose through religion, philosophy, art, or science itself. Is this search itself an adaptation, a way to bind communities to sustain hope? Or is it a clue that we are oriented toward meaning even if we cannot prove it? The risk of nihilism is real. If evolution is blind, then life has no inherent value. Yet across cultures, humans resist this conclusion. We create systems of ethics, visions of justice, dreams of transcendence. Perhaps as philosopher Ernst Cassirer suggested, humans are symbolic animals, defined not by biology alone, but by our capacity to generate meaning. And perhaps that is why the story of our origins provokes unease. If we are only clever apes, then our philosophies are illusions. But if we are more, then evolution is not the whole story. The bones do not answer. They show development, but not destiny. So we return to the ancient grave. The beads, the pigment, the careful placement all testify to minds asking questions science alone cannot resolve. Why do we honor the dead? Why do we imagine beyond survival? Why do we hunger for truth? The grave is both evidence and riddle. It proves that early humans cared, imagined, symbolized. But it leaves unanswered what they believed, what they hoped, what they knew. It leaves unanswered whether meaning is ours alone or written into the fabric of the cosmos. Philosophy, then, is not an escape from evolution, but its companion. It arises from the same minds that shaped tools and painted caves. It is part of what makes us human, and it is why the story of our origins cannot be told in fossils alone. Yet the question persists, are our values, our consciousness, our purposes only the byproducts of survival, or are they glimpses of a deeper reality? The grave does not say, the beads do not say, the bones do not say. We are left with silence, and in that silence, the oldest of questions: who are we? Why are we here? What does it mean to live, to die, to wonder? The story of human evolution answers many things, but these questions remain, and perhaps they always will. In a laboratory drawer under sterile light rests a fragment of jaw. In a museum case, Lucy's delicate bones stand silent. In a Siberian freezer, ancient DNA sleeps until machines awaken it. Each fragment is like a shard of mirror. When we piece them together, we glimpse a face our own. But the mirror is cracked, incomplete. What looks back at us is never whole. The story of human origins has been told through fossils, tools, genes, and myths. Science has traced our lineage back millions of years from Australopithecus to Homo erectus to Homo sapiens. It has mapped our genomes, revealing kinship with chimpanzees and inheritance from Neanderthals and Denisovans. It has excavated art and burial signs of imagination and meaning. The mainstream narrative is clear: humans evolved through natural processes shaped by time and chance. We are part of the great web of life, continuous with all that came before. Yet even within this clarity, uncertainty remains. The fossil record is fragmentary. The genetic record is complex. The cultural record is uneven. Each discovery closes one gap but opens another. The march from ape to human dissolves into a branching thicket with dead ends and missing pages. The story is not a ladder, but a labyrinth. And in the labyrinth, speculation thrives. Some argue for punctuated leaps rather than gradual shifts. Others suggest hidden cousins whose fossils remain buried. Outside science, myths of ancient visitors, intelligent design, and divine sparks persist. These ideas reflect not evidence, but longing for meaning, for purpose, for a story less random. The question becomes not only what we are, but how we know. Are we telling the truth of our past or constructing narratives that satisfy our hunger for coherence? The history of errors and frauds. Piltdown, Nebraska. Man reminds us of our vulnerability. The story of discovery is also a story of missteps. Our mirror is not only cracked, it is clouded by our desires. Philosophy deepens the unease. If evolution explains our bodies, does it also explain our minds, our morals, our dreams? Are consciousness and ethics only adaptive illusions, or do they point to something beyond biology? Science offers no final word. It explains processes, not purposes. The rest is silence. And yet in that silence we continue to search. The graves of our ancestors show care and reverence. The caves show imagination. The artifacts show intention. These are not accidents of evolution alone. They are expressions of a species that refuses to live without meaning. Perhaps that is the true lesson of the mirror. It will never be whole. The reflection will always be partial. But in the act of piecing fragments together, we reveal something deeper, not a final answer, but the restless nature of humanity itself. We are the species that questions, that doubts, that wonders. The mirror, then, is both broken and beautiful. It shows us as animals kin to apes, shaped by selection. It shows us as artists, philosophers, seekers. It shows us as hybrids of many lineages, mosaics of genes, keepers of myths. But it does not show us complete, and perhaps it never will. For every fossil we find, countless more are lost. For every gene we decode, mysteries remain. For every theory we propose, counter-arguments rise. The story of our origins is unfinished and may always be. So we stand before the glass case, the DNA sequence, the cave wall. We see ourselves reflected, but only partly. The reflection is blurred, fractured, incomplete. It invites us to humility, to curiosity, to wonder. The Gong Chua Tron Ven, this unfinished mirror, is not a flaw. It is the essence of our story. It tells us that knowledge is always provisional, that certainty is always fragile, that mystery is part of being human. And so the final question lingers as it has since the first handprint on stone. Who are we really? Are we clever apes, cosmic accidents, divine creations, hybrids of Earth and beyond? The answer remains hidden. The mirror does not show. But in the act of asking, we reveal ourselves. We are the question, and perhaps that is enough.